something in the shadows so dark and evil that it's making its victims go literally crazy. Governments in complete disarray, a looming threat that the characters have been chasing for many months, and enemies turning to help those of different faiths because the looming evil is so dire in nature. We're going to talk about the end of a campaign in this week's After the Game. Before we get into the video, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button to help us grow. If you don't mind getting the notifications, be sure to hit that bell. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy our content. And leave a comment below for content that you would find useful in your RPGs. Madness Beyond the Western Shore was the campaign that recently ended for me as a GM. This followed up from a previous campaign that I had run called the Kingdoms of Espar, which is one of the continents in the homebrew world of Earth, which I was inspired to create in the 90s based on the world of Greyhawk located on Oerth. Now, the campaign, the Kingdoms of Espar, has so much content and so much information that I love to share. There just isn't enough time to go over all of it. I thought instead that I would focus on Madness Beyond the Western Shore because, like many campaigns that are started, it was never able to fully be realized to the conclusion that I had planned as a DM. Due to life of being an adult, the challenges of meeting regularly with the players and myself just became too challenging for us to overcome as a party. Now, these players had been taking their characters from level 1 all the way up to level 10. Once we hit level 10, the plan was to continue going on milestone up through level 20 in a fantastic, epic story. When the players started, I gave them a lot of free rein to create characters that they would enjoy playing. I needed just a little bit of backstory, primarily being why were they getting on a boat. So the start of the campaign, they all knew was going to start something with a boat. Beyond that, it was very quiet. Some of the players who had played in the previous campaign of the Kingdoms of Espar were curious on how it interacted with that campaign. This campaign actually started 1 week before the conclusion in game time for Kingdoms of Espar. So the players themselves kind of knew what was going on, which was great because they were able to fold some of the previous campaign into their current character backstories. And I thought the execution from the players was fantastic to be able to utilize some of the goings on in that campaign into the new campaign of Madness Beyond the Western Shore. We started our session 0 just talking about character creation and making sure that everybody had a good equal understanding of the campaign, my play style, and kind of a general premise of the story. But I didn't want to give away too much. So I really talked more about the themes and challenges that they would be facing and the type of campaign that I envisioned playing compared to the previous campaign. So they had a good basis and understanding of how that campaign would compare story-wise and play-wise to the previous. So a little more gritty, a little more down and dirty, a lot more challenging. The players came at it with fantastic characters, with rich backstories, and the character development they did in the beginning sessions was phenomenal. Really carving out their place in the region that they found themselves in, growing in power as well as reputation, and beginning to kind of understand some of the challenges that face them ahead. Being stuck and isolated from a lot of their support was quite challenging for the characters as they were really adventuring from a new perspective in a new area that they didn't have a lot of support in. So they had to build bonds, they had to utilize skills, they had to really take control of their own destiny in these early game sessions. moving up through the levels, they realized some of the challenges that were facing them with some of the secret societies and cult-like behaviors were really an aspect of Shothrogott being freed and driving the followers insane. And those followers were in turn attempting to break the chains of Tharizdun. Now, if you know anything about D&D, you know Tharizdun is one of the big ultimate dark entities that must be stopped and contained at all costs. So the stakes were really, really high. Based on the actions of the characters and their interactions with the local populace from where they were stranded, they continue to build up a good reputation and earn favors and finally find a way to get off of the region that they were stuck on, which was great. Now they knew the bad guys went in several different directions, so it was really up to them which ones they would pursue and which ones they would kind of put off or kick the can down the road a ways. And again, I thought their decisions were great. They made really good in-game choices, things that played into their character development, character backstories, religions, their alignments. They played very, very well and worked really good as a group. So the Castaway Casting Company was born. And just like any campaign, as everybody started getting more and more things happening in the real world, it became more and more challenging to continue the story after they had progressed just into 10th level. Now, of course, each of the sessions, I do have my session outline. I also make sure that I have copies of all of the possible encounter foes that they could face and any type of maps or support materials. And I generally use those and play test them a few different ways and times, and then I try to write those into modules that I upload onto DM's Guild so that others can enjoy the story. And I like to get feedback to see how other people have kind of taken on some of those challenges. And generally I wait until after a campaign ends to do that. That way it allows me to do a couple different play tests, adjust some of the things that through the sessions I learn and want to change and fine tune, and read through my notes on where there were challenges for the players, for myself, for the encounters or interactions that I've put on, as well as kind of flesh out some of the NPCs that I initially create that they could encounter, the primary NPCs. Of course, I don't go through and do an NPC for every possible person that they could interact with, but I do important NPCs, and it really allows me to kind of fine-tune those, as well as add consistency so I can reuse them later should the characters come back to an area. Now with this campaign, as I mentioned, the players got up to 10th level, which was fantastic, quite an achievement, especially because we were using experience up until 10th level, and then milestone was the plan after that. But again, real life happens and gets in the way. Many GMs really face this, many tables face this, especially once the COVID pandemic hit, and it just became very challenging with moves and people in different locations having to do it virtually. I'm a tabletop gamer that enjoys being at the table with my players, so it was a lot of challenges. So we actually had to end the campaign earlier than anticipated. But several of the players are still interested in continuing their character's story in the adventure. So I'm looking at ways that I can change up my initial skeleton for the campaign to accommodate that. Because for the story itself, I still love the bones that I've put in place. I still want to see the reactions for the players when they go through some of the challenges and encounters and storytelling possibilities that are out there together. Especially because some of the characters, I had a lot of free reign to work on the backstory. By integrating some of those backstory possibilities into the campaign itself, I was able to put in some real good layers of character development and storytelling opportunity that blended really well with the character as well as with the story itself. So I had a lot of fun coming up with ideas and putting thoughts in place on how to really tie these characters into meaningful story arcs that would put the characters into all different types of moral dilemmas. And I love seeing that kind of character development come out over storytelling sessions through a campaign. So I'm really excited to see how we can continue. And one of my thoughts is to, as I said, adjust the bones a little bit to accommodate a kind of tighter focus. So instead of as many player characters, how can I redefine it a little bit and really dial it in for fewer players that we can deliver in a good, timely manner that meets a good schedule for all of us to be able to continue this storyline to its conclusion. As GMs, a lot of times we really have to think on our feet and improv and change up our plans. And when we have opportunities like this, I really encourage everybody, don't look at it as too challenging or a loss or anything. Look at it from the positive aspects of how can I rewrite or rewire things to really fit the upcoming needs, challenges, and demands that are facing me now. It's a great exercise to really stay positive, stay focused, and allow your ideas to continue to come to fruition. Ultimately, because of where the last sessions ended, they're in a new area. It's very possible, as I rework some of the bones, to get other players to join the campaign that'll be similar in level and similar in skill set. This is always a challenge just because the chemistry sometimes can be more difficult to do if you don't have that early progression. So it can be a little bit of a daunting task, but something that I think is, for both the players as well as myself, a good opportunity to continue telling this story, bringing new people into the mix, expanding our repertoire of who we know in the gaming community, as well as allowing others to kind of see different play styles that they may not have been exposed to yet. As a storytelling gamer, RP and storytelling is super important to me. I'm not as dialed into having the most tactical, strategy-driven games. So the story, telling the story, and seeing that story unfold through the tactics of the characters and their antagonists is really an important factor for me to really get fun from the game. That's how I have fun as a GM. That's how I really convey what my sessions are going to be like to my players, in hopes that they have the same interests and the same desire for those outcomes as I do, so that we really gel well at the table. Now, the campaign Madness Beyond the Western Shore, as I said, is most likely going to have to go through some changes and developments before it can see through to its continuation. I do, however, have all of my story notes from the first time I started writing the campaign, which was over 3 years ago. So I've got a lot of information to really dive through. It's going to take me some time to be able to figure it out. And my biggest concern is just making sure that I do not only the party of characters justice, but my players as well. So as I go through and start diving into this and looking at how we can progress forward, as well as how I can use some of the materials to spread it to the community going forward, again, I really want to look at ways that I can really keep the essence and the story lines and storytelling devices that the players brought into the campaign alive and well in those notes, in those one-shots, and in the materials that we'll be distributing out. This is just another reminder of how the D&D community is really focused on sharing content, on building things together, and not being the secretive, in your basement, not social kind of aspect. We want to share our stories. We want to tell our stories. We want others to experience the joy we derive from the game. While we may have some social anxieties and it may take a bit for us to warm up, once we start creating those bonds and sharing our love of the game, introducing new people to that love of the game, and kind of swapping out the aspects of players or GMs, the storytelling materials, we really help to strengthen the pillars that make this community what it is today. And while the initial plans are not going to be able to be seen through, with just a little bit of work, the players and their characters will still be able to have an impact on the world of Aearth. Their stories are going to go down into legend, and regardless of how going forward we take the campaign in dealing with Shathrogat, his lieutenants, and ultimately Tharizdun, those aspects are still just currently notes on paper, ideas in the mind, and possibilities for the future for myself as a GM, the players, and the characters that we ultimately create and introduce into our campaigns. Now, I've covered a lot of campaign starting points and ideas in previous videos. In this video series, if we do any more follow-up on Madness Beyond the Western Shores, going over some of the materials, looking at some of the plots that we introduced and how I kind of envisioned some of the possibilities that may not have been explored, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for me to share with you, the public, that I hope you're able to really take a hold of and utilize at your own games. And as we dive into some of that, you'll see that even as a creator myself, I use a lot of old tropes. I am a sucker for a good cliche. One of our player characters that unfortunately had to leave the game early was ultimately hinted at. They didn't have a whole lot of recollection of their past. They were brought up as an orphan, a poor person in a town that the other player characters kind of washed up to. And through building out, there were lots of hints that their similarity had been seen before. Others kind of gawked at them a bit, and they had seen this kind of profile before, and ultimately she ended up being one of the lost princesses, almost an Anastasia aspect of an entire different continent that was savaged by marauders, and the elves had to disperse. While we didn't get to explore that in-game in the character summary after they left the game, we really kind of ended it with them kind of going and discovering this and becoming part of that elven community, but left the caveat open that the other players knew where they were, and just a call away, just a message away, in case that player was able to come back. They had a good in, they had ability to move up their level to match with the other PCs. And again, it's stories like these that we can tell together. We can rip off cliches and bring into our campaigns as we explore them as a community, as a group, as friends around the table, as family sitting together telling these fantastic stories. It's a great reminder on how something as simple as a pen and paper RPG can bring us all closer together, regardless of the challenges that life can throw at us. Now, next week, I plan to jump back onto our session follow-up, where the party of The Last Light campaign is getting ready to battle, talk to, persuade, escape the Red Dragon. Join us then. I hope you enjoyed that video. Here's a link to another video that you may enjoy. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button to help us grow. If you'd like to support us, make sure you check out the description of the video with some links, and leave a comment to let us know, where will your adventures take you?